Hmm.
All right, we are live on Facebook and YouTube.
Thank you, Declan. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is the monthly meetup that I have. I've received some questions in advance and I'm going to go through those. And then if folks are joining and have questions of their own, or there's something I say that leads to a question, please submit it. Declan, could you tell folks how they can submit questions?
Yes, so if you're watching on the Facebook Live, you can put your question into the chat box and we will get to them after we go through the pre-submitted questions, or you can email them to chairmancs@dccouncil.gov or message any of the chairman's social media accounts.
And if anybody wants that repeated, ask in the chat to do that. Let me say, though, I'm not monitoring the chat. If you have something to say, you'll be saying it to Declan. So let me go through the questions I've gotten. Again, thank you all. We spent about an hour doing this. The first question I got was, I'd like to express my displeasure for the increase in vehicle registration fees. What are the additional funds going toward? Why do battery vehicles get a discounted rate when they are on average heavier than gas vehicles and therefore would have a great impact on roads in the city? When the council had the budget before us back in the spring, it was the Committee on Transportation and the Environment chaired by Councilmember Che who recommended the increase. And if I remember correctly, the increase was slight other than for heavier vehicles. I believe it was vehicles weighing over 3 tons that would see a significant increase in their vehicle registration fee. She did this in part to provide some financial disincentive to for heavier vehicles because they are more wear and tear, in part to raise some additional dollars. She did propose that money be spent in a number of ways. For instance, increasing the capital improvement plan by $18.6 million for planning and implementation of safety infrastructure around schools. Almost $1 million in the capital improvement plan to support the creation of a master plan that will facilitate the upgrade of temporary safety projects to permanent, safer, more attractive streetscape features. $8.9 million in the capital improvement plan to study, design, and construct a pedestrian and bicycle crossing of the Anacostia Freeway and the CSX railway line on East Capitol Street. I'm only going through some of these. Theoretically, when revenue is raised, it goes into the general fund, and then expenditures are charged against the general fund. And so there isn't a direct line between an increase in vehicle registration fees and a particular expenditure. But I just very quickly summarized some of the larger expenses, and the registration fees don't pay for all of that. It's not that much money, but if you want to get a fuller report, go to the council's website and look up the Committee on Transportation and the Environment's report on recommendations for the fiscal year 2023 budget. I will add that as a policy measure, the city council is these days creating a slight financial incentive for electric vehicles, and that would be why battery vehicles get a discounted rate. So this wasn't all about heavier vehicles. It also included recognizing that electric vehicles are heavier because of the battery, but we want electric vehicles because they're better for the environment. The second question is, Whittier Elementary has pre-K doors that do not lock. Aren't locked doors the first line of defense in a school? why haven't you, there was a capital there, or DGS fixed these little problems? Well, the council doesn't fix the problems. That's on the executive side, but I had a meeting today with DGS, the director, as well as about a dozen DGS officials. And we talked about a number of schools, doors that are not locking, and specifically Whittier. So this has been, not only was this previously brought to their attention, but it was specifically brought to their attention today by me and Councilmember Robert White, and Councilmember Louis George was on the call as well. It was about an hour-long meeting. Third question, Mayor Bowser recently announced that her administration would undertake a formal transition in the preparation of her next 4 years in office. Do you plan to undertake similar formal transition process at the council? Answer is no. Will you undertake a review of how the council can better address future issues and challenges, including a review of the council's organizational structure, staffing, rules, and oversight of district agencies and departments? The answer to that is yes. I have begun conversations with council members to discuss committees for for council period 25, which is the 2 years beginning this January. And absolutely on my mind, I would even say top of mind, is whether to our committees we can better address some of the challenges that we have. Generally, I don't talk a lot about the council's organizational structure because that is for the council to decide, and my approach is to find consensus among the members. And what does that mean? That means I talk to members, and if a majority of the members think that there should or should not be a committee, then that is likely to be my recommendation. That's just one example, but I look for consensus that will be broadly supported by council members. And I think that's important in terms of our organizational structure, because the organizational structure serves the organization. And I appreciate that the public is concerned. And I do listen to that input. But I don't share a lot until I put the full recommendation before all the council. What can be done by the council, mayor, and citizens to increase enrollment at UDC and raise the profile of its programs in nursing, teaching, environmental science, and other fields? I'd also like to see student, faculty, and workforce housing on the UDC campus and in UDC-controlled buildings. I meet monthly with the president of the university, and one of the issues we talk about is enrollment. I think he is the more expert on what can be done to increase enrollment at UDC. I think Ronald Mason is an excellent president of UDC, and so I look to him for guidance what can be done. I don't think there's a lot that the legislature can do, and I'm sensitive to the fact that we do not want to politicize the university. The university is an academic institution. It's not a political body. And that's actually important when it comes to its academics. So I look to him for guidance on that. With regard to housing, that is an issue that the president has been looking at. The question was, I'd like to see student, faculty, and workforce housing on the UDC campus. President's looking at that, and in UDC-controlled buildings. I'm not quite sure what that means because their buildings are academic. Next question, do you intend to lead a second effort to repeal the ballot initiative to raise the minimum wage for tipped workers? Like last time, it passed by a vote that represents the will of the people, and I am concerned that the chairman will once again overstep and undo the will of the people. Well, this question is a little frustrating, just to be honest, because I have said for months repeatedly that I have no intent to lead an effort or support an effort to repeal the initiative. I did not support the initiative, but I will not lead or support an effort to repeal it. And I've said that over and over again. So clearly the person behind the question has not heard that. I do want to note, because it's implicit in the question, When we repealed it in 2018, the bill was widely opposed by tipped workers. You can go to the record and read the committee report on Bill 22-913. Bill 22-913. Overwhelmingly, tipped workers did not support it. I am not aware of that same kind of opposition this year. And even if it were to materialize in the next few weeks, which I highly doubt, I am on record as saying I will not lead or support an effort to repeal the initiative. Next question, given the digital divide and the fact that social media doesn't feel safe for everyone to engage with, when will the chairman engage in listening sessions and town halls that are in person and not virtual? This allows more people the opportunity to interact and be heard and hold government officials accountable. Well, let me say two things. First of all, I love in person. I hate going to meetings that are digital as opposed to in person, but we're getting a better attendance with these virtual meetups than we were getting with them being in person. If we did this in person, it'd probably be Saturday morning and there'd probably be 8 to 12 people. I'm guessing that right now there are 3 dozen or more folks who are watching. So we get a better turnout. However, I am also making a point, since we've come out of the pandemic, of resuming going to community meetings, and I generally go to a couple a week, at least a couple a week. I'm speaking at an ANC meeting later this week. And so I am out in the community. I'm speaking at ANC 7B this week. So I'm out in the community much more, which allows more people more opportunity to interact and be heard and hold me as a government official accountable. Next question. Many Ward 3 and Ward 4 residents are worried that the proposed curbside bike lanes on Connecticut Avenue won't be safe for seniors, children, the disabled, and other pedestrians. The bike lane study was done pre-pandemic and is now outdated. DDOT projects that thousands of cars will divert onto neighborhood streets, and narrowing Connecticut Avenue will create gridlock and delay emergency responders. What evidence do you need to reevaluate this project? Answer. Generally, these bike lane proposals do not come to the council for approval. They're done administratively by the Department of Transportation. If the council is to get involved, almost certainly the two key players on the council, the two council members that the rest of the council will look to will be the Ward 3 member, since most of Connecticut Avenue is in Ward 3, and the chair of the Transportation Committee. And I don't know who the chair of the Transportation Committee will be next year, since Mary Cheh is stepping down. If the Ward 3 member is totally in support of this, it's probably unlikely that a majority of council members will go against the ward member. Similarly, the Transportation Committee chair will have a lot of persuasion over this. If you don't believe me, or you think I'm being lazy here, you can look to the debate on the ANC redistricting back in June, when I went against the ward member and got clobbered. So folks who feel strongly about the bike lanes need to work on the Ward 3 member-elect, Matt Truman, and the Transportation Committee chair, who has not been decided yet. The next question. The Washington Post reported on Friday that DCHA, that's DC Housing Authority, internal audit found evidence of illegal procurements under previous and current executive staff. Do you support Brenda Donald continuing as DCHA's, as Housing Authority's director? The short answer is yes, I do. Brenda Donald was brought in not because she has expertise in public housing, but because she is widely regarded as a good administrator and can help to stabilize the housing authority. Everything that I have seen and heard suggests that what she inherited, it was a complete mess, if not worse. And in fact, the audit, although the audit does find inappropriate action under under the current executive director, most of the problem predates, with the procurement predates the current executive director. I'm very disturbed about the audit. I have urged that Councilmember Anita Bonds, who has oversight, be aggressive with oversight here. But if Brenda Donald is forced to resign, there will be even more turmoil and instability as the housing authority needs to get back on its feet and turn around. Brenda Donald is not there long-term. She is there, I believe, through next August. So that's roughly 10 more months, which is probably the time it will take to find a permanent executive director for the housing authority. The agency needs some stability, and I have a lot of respect for Ms. Donald, and I want enough enough time for the agency to get back on its feet. These successive reports are very disturbing. The one from HUD was really not new, but it clearly struck a chord with residents across the district. The one that came out last week was new and very disturbing about procurement practices. Next question, will the Committee of the Whole be marking up the Metro for DC Amendment Act before the end of the year as you promised? It is on our schedule. There's an awful lot of business going to the council right now, but it's on our schedule to mark up December 6th. My hope is that we will make that. This is the bill that would provide every resident $100 per month transit subsidy to use Metro. This is not $100 that somebody can take as cash and use for something else, and nor is it cumulative. So if you're a resident, you have to apply, you get $100 on a fare card. Excuse me, if you spend $100 in bus rides and rail trips, then you've depleted it, and next month you get another $100. If you spend $50, which I believe is actually the average for folks who have a transit subsidy based on other programs, then next month you would get another 50. So it'd come back up to 100. And if you don't spend any of it, then you don't get any more next month. You just have the same $100. That's the way it works. It's good for supporting Metro. It's also good for promoting and encouraging folks to use public transit. The fact of the matter is that we need more folks to use transit, increase ridership. That'll reduce vehicle trips on the road. And also we need more folks to just recognize that buses are for everybody, and we want everybody to get on the buses as well as the rail. The next question, the current budget contains a $55 million outlay for a 550 student elementary school on Hardy Park. I think it's sort of in the area of the Hardy Recreation Center in Ward 3. Both the incoming Ward 3 councilman and the incoming Ward 3 school board member have expressed varying degrees of opposition to taking the green space for this purpose. Likewise, the local neighborhood has been extremely vocal in opposition. Will you continue to support this outlay in the next budget, or is there a better use for this money in other wards with severe school needs that would welcome a new school? Well, there's a lot in that. I continue to be supportive of building a new elementary school to reduce enrollment pressures. However, we had a hearing recently on enrollment pressures, and it's not clear that the enrollment pressures have met projections, and that the enrollment pressures may be shifting or even subsiding a little bit. In addition, much of the enrollment for the new school would come from Stoddard, and I don't support that if it means that individuals from the Glover Park neighborhood have to traverse a wide park, that's Glover Archwell Park, to get to this new school. So do not read into what I'm saying that I am opposed to it, but there are questions that need to be answered, and the plan needs to be refined. There also was part of this question, uses money in other wards with severe school needs that would welcome a new school. There really aren't other wards where there's the enrollment pressure that we're seeing in Ward 3. What we're seeing in most of the rest of the city is where the schools are not struggling with too much enrollment, but are not struggling with too much enrollment. So right now, I'm concerned that we need to be careful how many new seats we are building in this city. But I will add, Ward 3 has the smallest number of public schools in the DCPS system, and I believe it has no charter schools, unlike in other wards. And so there has been severe enrollment pressures in Ward 3. Next question, when will you, as chairman of the council, ensure that Deanwood and Burrville have a small area plan? When will you ensure that residents of Ward 7 have more grocery stores? With the Safeway near Minnesota Avenue closing, what grocery options are coming to replace it? All right, 3 questions. I'm not aware of plans for a small area plan for Deanwood or Burrville, or Deanwood and Burrville. When we adopted the comprehensive plan last year, I do not recall that Deanwood or Burrville were on the list. So if this questioner wants to see one there, what I recommend is you work with the ANC to develop a formal request to the Office of Planning. When will you ensure that residents of Ward 7 have more grocery stores? That's certainly a goal that I support. The next question has to do with Safeway closing. My recollection is that the developer plans on building a new grocery store or having a new grocery store as part of that redevelopment. I don't think that's enough, but I don't believe that this store is going to close and there will be no grocery option in that neighborhood. We do need more grocery stores, no question about that. I have in the past had conversations with Safeway about what it takes to attract a grocer like Safeway to the city. And before the pandemic, when I would go to the retail convention where the mayor's economic folks would meet with, among others, grocery retailers, grocery stores, and trying to get them east of the river was a top topic. So I'm very supportive of that and want to see more grocery stores, not fewer. Next question, I should say more grocery stores, not fewer, east of the river. Next question, I suggest that the DC government offer loan forgiveness and loan cancellation for DCPS and DC charter teachers and paraprofessionals who stay employed for 3 years or more. Would you support this, and how will you address teacher and paraprofessional shortages that adversely affect the quality of education in the Deanwood and Burrville communities? I'm guessing that these questions are coming from somebody who lives in Deanwood. We just had a hearing on teacher turnover and retention, and this is not a problem solely in Deanwood and Burrville. It is a problem across the city. It's clear to me that there are a number of strategies that DCPS should be pursuing, and I made this clear to the chancellor. I can't say that I felt that the chancellor got it, but the strategies would include, first, the teachers need to have a contract. And even though the teachers or the teacher union has to agree to a contract, there are things that the chancellor could and in the past could have done, could do now and could have done to get a contract They're now in arbitration, which happens after impasse in negotiations. The chancellor could have forced impasse earlier. The chancellor could go directly to the teachers union executive committee. The chancellor could do in a number of ways, push to get an agreement. And I fault him for not having done that. Contract is the first on my list for how to reduce teacher turnover. And that in turn would address teacher and paraprofessional shortages. Second, fix the HR department. The HR, there were teachers at the end of September who still hadn't been paid for this school year. There are teachers who put in their retirement papers last spring and still haven't gotten their retirement. There are teachers who took family medical leave and that wasn't credited appropriately or properly. There are far more HR complaints than I have ever heard in the past. And I would put that number 2 on my list. Number 3, I have a bill that I am hoping to move this fall that would stabilize, I'm planning on moving this fall, that would stabilize budgeting for individual local schools themselves. And I believe that that will promote stability in the schools. We will stop spending each spring with teachers and schools and parents arguing that they don't want their budget cut because this bill would ensure that schools do not get cut. And that in turn should promote teacher retention in the school. I think the chancellor should be looking at flexible scheduling. I don't know quite what that means in terms of design or cost. It's not clear to me that they're really looking at it at all. I think the chancellor ought to also work more closely with the teachers union on making changes to impact. I know impact is their evaluation system. I know the teachers union wants that eliminated, but short of that, the chancellor could be doing more to improve the impact evaluation process. Next question. At your last meeting with ANC commissioners, DDOT Director Lott said that he'd follow up with commissioners about an issue with DDOT denying residential handicap parking permits to DC residents who have rear driveways and garages. However, DDOT has not followed up and has been unresponsive when we contact them. How do we get DDOT to follow up on this concern and to respond to commissioners who reach you? Whoever wrote the question, please put in the text how Declan Falls on my staff can contact you. And if you're not here, then I don't know how you're going to hear this if you're not here. I'll reach out to Declan and give him some details, and we will follow up with the director to get him to respond. Based on what information I have with this question, I don't know what I could say to the director, but we can contact his office when we know exactly who has not been followed up with and what the issue was. Next question, MPD. I got like 20 questions. But we're, I think, number 7. No, we're at number 14. MPD is not willing to address the matter of fully functioning crime cameras in DC. In light of the ongoing and increasing crime in DC, crime cameras and curfews on DC juveniles are critical. Why didn't DC partner with Prince George's County when they successfully did this? Why is MPD reluctant to pursue this strategy? I don't know that there's really any support in the council or with the chief for imposing a curfew on juveniles. We've been through that about 10, 15 years ago. It's very controversial. So I know it sounds good, but the goal here is not to be arresting a lot of kids. It's to be finding strategies that kids will stay out of trouble. So that speaks to the curfew part about it. With regard to cameras, I'm not sure what to say there about fully functioning crime cameras in DC. Metropolitan Police have cameras around the city. I don't have oversight. It's not under the committee of the whole, so I don't know what that camera program looks like, but I'm not aware that there's widespread non-functioning cameras. There is a private property camera program where the city will pay for residents to install cameras, crime cameras. Don't go out and install a crime camera and then find out what the program will pay for. Find out first and then act accordingly. I do want to add, though, that part of this question is in light of the ongoing increase in crime in DC. Earlier this year, crime was unquestionably increasing. And I pulled up some statistics from August where it showed violent crime was up 5% compared to the previous year to date. That was in August. Crime has gone down significantly since then. And today, year to date compared to last year to date, violent crime is down 5%. Now, I totally get it. When there's a shooting on your street, crime is up. And I also get it that crime is a matter of perception. And if people, not entirely, but perception is important. And if people feel unsafe, that's important. And that needs to be dealt with. But I don't want to play into crime is continuing to go up. There's too much. If I remember correctly, only a few years ago, the total number of homicides in the district was below 100. And this year to date, it's around 182. So it's almost doubled from a few years ago. But it is actually down from last year. So we need to do things about crime. And I think there's another question which kind of touches on this. In fact, there are two more questions. I witnessed a carjacking near DuPont Circle yesterday in the middle of the afternoon. MPD says we have had 426 carjackings in 2022. This is unacceptable. I agree. And I'm starting to question why I'm raising my kids in DC. Why isn't the council discussing this issue? Well, actually, the council is discussing this issue. We're discussing it amongst ourselves and we're discussing it with the chief. The chief has actually brought more focus to dealing with carjackings. It doesn't mean that we've solved the problem, but there is more attention to this and trying to bring down the number of carjackings. And even if the number of carjackings is declining, and I don't have that statistic in front of me, so I'm not sure, there's still far too many carjackings. But it isn't that the council is not discussing this, and it isn't that the chief hasn't heard the word that he needs to focus on this. Because we need to. The next question, will you be supporting Councilmember Pinto's amendment to the criminal code bill to raise maximum gun possession penalties? It doesn't seem smart to be lowering penalties for gun crimes while the city is in the middle of a 2-year crime wave. Let's see, how do I want to answer that question? Often the go-to answer to crime is to increase penalties. And the research is quite clear that penalties are not the most effective way to deal with crime. The fact that we have, for example, a 30-year mandatory minimum first-degree homicide does not in itself deter people from shooting and killing other people. And that's true with most of our sentencing. Sentencing isn't what criminals are thinking about. The research is pretty clear that getting arrested and getting prosecuted and being sent off to jail or prison is what makes a difference. When roughly 50% of the homicides that were committed last year were not solved last year, or roughly 75% of the robberies that occurred last year were not solved last year, that's a problem. That does not have, there's no deterrent effect in that. So it is it's what criminologists call swift and certain justice. But let me add this, the criminal code revision bill was the product of about 10 years of research and debate by the Criminal Code Reform Commission, which included representatives of the U.S. Attorney and the DC Attorney General and other law enforcement stakeholders. There was a lot of research that was done trying to get proportional sentencing, or serious crimes get a longer sentence. There also was a lot of look at what sentences are actually being imposed. So it's one thing for the law to say, for example, that the penalty for a crime is up to 5 years. And it's another thing what the judges actually sentence. And usually it's less than that. If I remember correctly, for gun possession, the average penalty or something like 90 or 95% of the sentences are around 3 years. And the bill that's before us tomorrow doesn't change that. Next question, when is the Deanwood Deli opening in the Ivy City Smokehouse? When is the Parkside retail area expected to open? How soon is the circulator coming to Deanwood? I do not know when these retail stores are opening. And I also don't know when the circulator is coming to Deanwood. I do know the council has been supportive of expanding the circulator. 2 more questions, then I'm going to turn to you, Declan. In DC, smoking in private multi-rental housing has reached dangerous proportions for our health. Secondhand smoke is known to be associated with a number of diseases. We do support and propose a law to support smoke-free housing. HUD requires smoke-free public housing. Such a proposal is also supported by the EPA. Well, I haven't looked this up, but I find it hard to believe that HUD actually prohibits people from smoking in their homes, even if it's public housing. They might in common areas, but not in their homes. And while I'm sure the EPA discourages smoking because secondhand smoke is an environmental hazard, I doubt that they are supporting banning people from smoking in their homes. I do not support banning people from smoking in their homes. Let's think about this. Over the last decade, we have been trying to decriminalize various drug offenses because we don't want people arrested, for instance, for cannabis possession. But now what we're going to do is we're going to criminalize cigarette smoking in people's homes. So I don't think there's support in the council for prohibiting people from smoking in their homes. And I totally get that it can be a very obnoxious and possibly hazardous to tenants in neighboring apartments. But I don't see a legislative solution to that. Last question, would the council consider a reimbursement program for DC residents to buy tracking devices for carjackings and wheel locks to help prevent tire and rim thefts? Montgomery County already provides the tracking devices to residents for free. I'm not familiar with the Montgomery County, what they're doing there. I certainly think we ought to consider it and understand it better. What's the cost? What's the effectiveness of it? That's kind of important. Oftentimes we do something because it sounds good, and let's see if it's really effective and or the most cost effective in terms of, in this case, reducing carjackings. With that, let me turn to Declan. Do we have questions?
Yep. So we have a couple of questions in the Facebook chat, but first we had a couple more questions emailed ahead of time. So I'll go through those first. And again, if you do have a question, feel free to put it in the Facebook chat and we'll get to it in just a minute. So the first question we received: the council passed the Idaho Stop Bill unanimously permitting cyclists to run stop signs legally, encouraging a great many more people to bike, young and old, without bike training, registration, licensing, and insurance. In the hand of DDOT is reckless and sure to end in fatalities. Does no one in the council see the hazards that await the city?
I'm not sure that council members would agree with the questioner. A lot of bicyclists do not stop when they get to a stop sign now, and there are other jurisdictions who have made it clear that bicyclists don't have to stop at a stop sign as long as they have looked and ensured that the intersection is clear. What the council did does not say it's okay for a bicyclist to just run a stop sign whenever they want to all the time. And if a bicyclist is careless and drives through an intersection when there are cars coming, they're going to hit them. The bicyclist is not innocent in this. I have to say, I think there's just a little bit too much. I'm trying to think of how I want to put this. I'll put it politely, annoyance between bicyclists or by bicyclists toward cars and by some drivers toward bicyclists. And I think the better approach is for folks to exercise safety when they're on the road. When I am driving and I see a bicyclist whiz by me and go through the intersection and there are no opposing cars, I don't know that it's a big deal, to be honest. So, but I will add this. I am very concerned that my colleagues have done a lot in terms of trying to change the rules of the road in the name of promoting safety without having evidence to base it on. The goal should be to reduce deaths and accidents. Those are two different things. And we've seen statistically that we're not reducing either deaths or accidents. And yet we keep doing more without the evidence to support what we're doing. So I'll just add that. Next, Declan.
Next question. Aussie continues to fail to get kids to school safely and on time. Parents who elect to take their kids to school receive a minimal reimbursement that is always late and requires multiple follow-ups all the way to the superintendent. This agency has changes in leadership, yet continues to underperform despite a significant budget allocation for technology. How are you holding them accountable?
Well, I discuss this almost monthly with the superintendent. That is the person who is the head of OSSI. Their transportation office has been a real mess. I believe they lost the director of transportation, and then discovered that with that vacancy, they discovered that there were much deeper problems, and they're trying to fix those. I don't remember offhand the timeline, but they hope to have a new transportation director and start to work their way out of this. So it's compounded as well by the fact that with so many other jobs in our economy, that there are vacancies and not enough workers. So there aren't enough drivers, and that's created stresses as well. I can't really fault OSSI for not having enough bus drivers, enough buses when they're trying to recruit and they're not successful. If there are things they could be doing differently, yes, I want to know that. Some of the problems, and I'm aware of the late and insufficient reimbursements, expense reimbursements. I talked about that with the superintendent just a couple of weeks ago. And I've been assured that they're working on it, and I believe they are working on it. So a little too slow, a little too frustrating, but they are working on it, and I will continue to keep after them about this.
The next question, it's a longer one. It reads, the evidence presented supporting the criminal code revisions points to the certainty of punishment rather than the severity of punishment as the actual deterrent to criminal activity. Are you planning to address the issues that will accompany the implementation of the criminal code revision, including enhancing MPD to increase closure rates, pressing the federal government for more judges and prosecutors, and funding robust data gathering at every level of the criminal justice system?
The short answer is yes. And I'm wondering if the person who wrote that heard me earlier this year when I was talking about what we should be doing to reduce crime. In my view, one of the most important things we can do is increase the case closure rate. When I chaired judiciary, I used to regularly ask the chief, well, what's the caseload per detective? What are you doing to increase the closure rate? Second, I would ask not just of the chief, but I would ask of other law enforcement, including the U.S. Attorney, what are we doing to prosecute more effectively? I have consistently advocated that, for example, with regard to guns, that the U.S. Attorney ought to have a gun prosecution unit. There are other cities where they do that. A gun prosecution unit prosecutes gun cases more quickly, has a much higher conviction rate, and better results all around. As I think I said earlier, swift and certain justice is the most effective crime control, not the length of sentencing. I think the way this question began was the certainty of sentencing rather than the duration of it. That's where you get more deterrent, and increasing the closure rate. There are a couple other strategies for increasing the closure rate. Besides ensuring there are enough detectives, that their caseload isn't above what's considered the norm. One of those strategies is to do more to increase community trust of the police. So over a year ago, there was a shooting on a rec field, Watkins rec field, and it involved two teams that had been playing tag football. Two players, opposing teams, got into it. They apparently spent the game arguing with each other, and one of them settled the argument by shooting the other something like 11 times. There were no witnesses. Now think about it. Two teams have been playing, two players have been arguing the whole time, and there were no witnesses. Of course there were witnesses. Nobody was willing to come forward. That's the point here, is that increasing community trust of police will increase the number of cases that close, because more people will be willing to come forward as witnesses. There was a shooting on Dubois Place a year ago, maybe at this point, a year and a half ago. There were, I believe, 10 individuals involved, 10 different guns or shell casings from 10 different guns were found, and yet there's only one witness. That case there would be prosecutions, but there's only one witness. And so increasing community trust is another important component here to closing cases. Next question.
The next one reads, the recent report on the DC Housing Authority by HUD suggests that DCHA has substantially overpaid landlords to rent apartments for voucher recipients. HUD also says that it wants DCHA to reimburse the US government for the amount of overpayment. This could add up to tens of millions of dollars. Given the seriousness of this situation, will the committee of the whole hold hearings on the DCHA scandal, or will it cede that responsibility to only the Committee on Housing?
Well, only the Committee on Housing has jurisdiction. And for me to step in could be overreaching. I am very concerned about the HUD report. I will say that there is concern in some parts of our city that private sector housing is being overwhelmed by voucher recipients because the economics are such that if the housing authority is willing to pay above market rent, then that's very attractive to landlords, and that needs to be looked at more carefully. Whether in fact the housing authority has overpaid is something that I believe the housing authority is disputing, and they are required to respond to HUD within 90 days. The bottom line is that I would like to see more oversight of the housing authority, and I do think there should be some hearings, but we are at this point 6 weeks from the end of the council period, And it's not likely that any committee other than the housing committee would be able to step in the next 6 weeks to do, to have hearings as the questioner is advocating. But I do think there needs to be more done to shine light on what's going on with the housing authority. Declan?
We had one more question about the housing authority, but I think you just addressed it, so I'm going to skip that one. I'm going now to the Facebook chat. So the first question says, when are council members and staff and city departments going to return back to working from the office? Same with ANC meetings.
Well, the council just passed legislation to permit ANCs to continue to meet in person, virtually, or hybrid. I'm not sure I completely agree with that, at least in the long term. I went along with it, at least in the short term. That speaks to the ANCs. Not every ANC agrees that there should be only in person. And in fact, I spoke at an ANC meeting a couple of weeks ago where they said they have much better attendance being hybrid. So they had a fair number of people in person. Some people who couldn't make it or were unwilling to go out at night were able to participate virtually. So they had much better attendance than they would have had pre-pandemic. With regard to the council, you know, I'm in my council office right now. I've been coming into my office every day. I'm not one who believes that we should continue to meet virtually, but not all of my colleagues are there yet. And so we are still meeting hybrid. The council meets in person. The committee of the whole meets in person. And but we also allow members to participate virtually. One of my colleagues just sent me a text saying that they just came down with COVID, so they'll be participating virtually tomorrow. That's an advantage to a hybrid meeting. The hearings, we still need to sort that out. I think we get better attendance, and it's less burdensome on the public if our hearings are virtual. Even though I think there are advantages to in-person. So this is still being sorted out, but I'm one who likes in-person. Next question.
Next two that I see here aren't really questions, but if you want to address them, you can. First one says, the new executive director of the OANC is impressive and listening. Glad to have someone in that position and that office having support.
That's great to hear. Kent Bass was an ANC commissioner for, I think, 10 years. He has a lot of energy and enthusiasm in his new role, and I'm glad to hear. I'm glad to hear that comment.
And the next one says, Chairman Mendelson, please oppose the lowered penalties for gun crimes, sexual abuse of minors, carjacking, and virtually every other crime in the RCCA. Lowering penalties for violent crime will take DC in the wrong direction, and I don't know a single person who thinks this is the right step to take.
Generally, the recommendations of the Criminal Code Reform Commission look closely at what actual sentences were, the sentencing guidelines, the actual sentences, and did not stray from that. We can have a penalty of, let's say, 15 years, up to 15 years. But if judges routinely sentence to, let's say, 8 years, then what are we accomplishing by keeping a 15-year sentence? And it may be that, well, you could argue that there's somebody who's really egregious and we want them to do more time. But we have in the criminal code a lot of enhancements. And what an enhancement is where additional time can be added. So let's take, for example, a gun offense. So carrying a pistol without a license has a certain penalty up to a period of time. I think it's 4 years. And but if you carry near a school then there's an enhancement, and I can't remember, it's 2 years, additional 2 years, additional 4 years. If you have a record, I think, of other charges, there's another enhancement. And that's kind of the way it is throughout the code. It's complicated in the sense that you have to read the different provisions and see how they fit together. So for example, there was some controversy for a hot second about the Criminal Code Reform Commission had recommended doing away with the crime of public urination. What we're voting on tomorrow maintains the crime of public urination, so that we're keeping the law as it's been. But the thinking in recommending getting rid of it was that, well, but it's still against the law. It's still a crime for indecent exposure. It's still a crime against the law for disturbing the peace. There are other offenses that can be charged. And so it's not like, oh, suddenly it becomes legal. But rather, if you look to other parts of the criminal code, you will see that there are other charges that can be filed. That's part of the problem with the criminal code, is that it was written in 1901 and then added to piecemeal. And as a result, there was a fair amount of inconsistency and conflicts. And this has been rewritten to be more, to more tightly fit together. And I think the other part of the question was, well, reducing sentences, but longer sentences don't necessarily follow as being better. So we can take the current penalties for carjacking, which, if I remember correctly, are something like 15 or 20 years, and we can make them longer. The fact of the matter is 15 years is pretty long, and that's not what's having an effect here. It's the fact that so many people commit the crime of carjacking and aren't getting convicted. They're not even getting arrested. That's where the problem is. Declan?
It is 6 p.m., but I do see 3 more questions in the chat that we can go through if you're able.
Yeah, but before you go there, let me just say, don't misread me as saying that I don't care about sentences, because sentences are important. But sentences are not the most important aspect of fighting crime. It is arrests, closing cases, and getting convictions. And the criminology research bears that out. Declan.
Next question. I know that the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights still needs a markup in the Business and Economic Development Committee before it can receive a council-wide vote before the end of the year. What will you do to keep this bill moving so that it doesn't languish before the end of this council period? The protections for these workers are 90 years overdue.
There are a lot of bills that are going through the council right now. For reasons I don't fully understand, committees seem to wait until the last minute. And that's not unique to our legislature. You see that in all the states. They wait to the last minute. And as a result, some bills don't get through. I do not know what the status is here. I don't know what council member, if it's Business and Economic Development, what Councilmember McDuffie is doing here with the bill. I was asked earlier about Metro for All, or Metro for DC Amendment Act, and I'm hopeful that we will get that out, but there are a lot of bills moving and it's hard to get them through. If the bill doesn't come out, it can be reintroduced next year. And maybe because of all the committee work that's been done this council period, it'll move more quickly. Declan?
The next one is, are you aware of any dates or a timeline for the council's consideration of the mayor's OUC director nomination?
I don't recall whether the nomination has actually been submitted. The mayor announces appointments and she doesn't always follow up with sending them to the council. Regardless, I'm not sure that the votes are there to confirm the mayor's nomination for OUC director. She was at the agency before. There was a very, very, very critical report from the DC auditor about the agency. And my sense is that a majority of the members think that we need somebody better at the agency. Declan.
And we have one more question in the chat, and I think you'll like this one. Each year, the mayor touts increased investment in schools, but the dollars invested have never matched rising costs. What steps will you take to ensure the mayor's budget meets record inflation and does not gut school budgets, further destabilizing neighborhood schools?
Well, a couple of things. One is that in the last few years, either the mayor or the council have increased the UPSFF. That's the foundational funding for the school systems. I say that plural. Any of you who don't follow, we have charters and we have DCPS. And to ensure that they're all treated fairly, we do what's called a uniform per pupil funding. Or it's the UPSFF. And that's been going up in each of the years. Where I see the problem is that DCPS, that's where we get the biggest complaint, that DCPS, they fund central support or central administration services first. Never hear any complaints about that. At the expense of the local schools, the individual schools. Year after year, in the spring, which is when we get the budget, there are schools where parents come forward and they see our schools being cut. And the complaint is compounded by DCPS then denying that the school's been cut. Take Hardy Middle School, for example. Hardy lost its federal ESSER dollars, about $300,000. And it got a little bit less, if I remember correctly, but we'll say maybe the same amount in special ed dollars for special ed students, which is not their general education program. And so as a result, they had to cut personnel in their general education budget. And when they complained, the chancellor said, Hardy wasn't cut, its budget got a slight increase. Well, maybe, but its general education budget was cut. The special ed increase doesn't help general education. And we see this in school after school. A few years ago, Henley Elementary in Ward 8. The chancellor decided that he was no longer going to pay for extended year that was school through June. And so Henley lost about $900,000. He said, well, the school wasn't cut because they still kept their funding for their regular school year. Well, they were cut because they paid for people in the school year out of those extra dollars. And we see this in school after school after school. This year, even though the chancellor said that, and listen to my language very carefully, that the submitted budget this year was the same or more than the submitted budget last year. I don't even know what that means. The reality is that something like 46 schools saw a reduction in their funds. And as a result, they were faced with having to lay off teachers. So the bill that I have, which is called the Schools First Funding Amendment Act, it's Bill 24-570. That bill would say that in the future, when the mayor submits the budget for the schools, for the DCPS, the schools will, each individual school will get the same budget they have this year in the current year, plus inflation. I'm oversimplifying it. It's a little more complicated, like plus the higher of the teacher's contract or the increase in the UPSFF. So this instability, these cutting year after year is going to stop. And the bill also says the DCPS can't go around with saying with 3 different budgets. So that when you talk about one budget, they respond by talking about a different budget for the schools. Literally, if this makes no sense to you, it makes no sense. But they have 3 different budgets, and depending upon the conversation, they will use one budget or a different budget. And we're saying that has to stop as well, so the parents just stop this, no longer have to go through the spring trauma of cuts. So what happened this year, for example, is that I think it was at Ludlow Taylor that they were told they were going to have less dollars. So they decided against their wishes that they were going to let go, I want to say, of a librarian, although all the schools are supposed to keep their librarians now. Well, all that got worked out and the funding got restored, probably because of council pressure. But meanwhile, the person left the school. They said, I want a job. So they found a different school within DCPS, but they found a different school. That does the Ludlow Taylor no good. We need stability in the school. We need stability with the funding. And as far as I'm concerned, if there isn't enough dollars and $1.2 billion in DCPS, I think there are enough dollars. But if there aren't, then the chancellor can do a little belt tightening in central, but not at the expense of the local schools. That was a long answer, but that's what I'm trying to do, is stabilize the funding for the schools through Bill 24-570. Declan, did I provoke any more questions?
I do not see any more questions, but if we did miss a question, or if you do have an outstanding one, please feel free to email it to chairmancs@dccouncil.gov and we can follow up.
I want to thank everybody. We went over a little bit, but I appreciate the participation. I will say, I was asked earlier, I like in person because I feel like I'm just talking to a laptop screen, and the interaction is always very helpful. But we do get better attendance here. So I look forward to seeing you all in person and next month when we do this again. And thank you all very much. And